recording? Okay. Good evening, and thank you all so much for joining us for the NABJ Business Task Force webinar on holiday retail reporting. I'm Jennifer Streaks, Senior Investing Reporter at Business Insider, and I will be moderating this panel. Tonight, we have an excellent panel filled with economists and journalists to help you with your holiday retail reporting. And thank you all so much for joining us. Also for the members, please stay after the panel is over because the co-chairs have a few announcements. So we're gonna dive right in, and I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves. I'm gonna start with Anthony.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Anthony Chukumba. I'm a sell-side equity research analyst, as well as a managing director with Loop Capital Markets. We are a minority-owned investment bank headquartered in downtown Chicago, hence the name Loop Capital. I have been covering specialty hardlines retail, so basically durable goods retailers, for close to 15 years at the institutional level. My clients are institutional investors, whether that's hedge funds or mutual funds, and I'm super excited to be here with you today.
Okay, thank you. Cristian.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Chris deRitis. I'm the Deputy Chief Economist at Moody's Analytics. We're a risk management and risk analysis firm. I've been involved in consumer credit, consumer analytics, as well as housing for the last 20 years, and I'm very excited to be here.
Jordan.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jordan Homan. I'm a retail reporter at the New York Times. I've been covering retail since early 2019, also an NABJ member. So happy to be on this panel.
Edward.
Hi, my name is Edward A. Ruma. I'm co-head of the consumer equity research team at the investment bank Piper Sandler. We're one of the largest teams on the street with over 70 analysts. Prior to being at Piper, I was at KeyBank Capital Markets for 13 years, leading our internet and media practice, and at JP Morgan for 8 prior to that. Focused on kind of technology and the confluence of technology and commerce.
Okay, great. So one more thing, attendees in the Zoom, if you have any questions, go ahead and put those in the chat for the Q&A session. We're probably gonna go like 30 to 45 minutes and then open it up for questions. So we're gonna jump right in. As we know, this is the first holiday retail season coming after the pandemic. So that makes it different in and of itself. But with inflation also being in the mix, how is that going to affect not just the numbers, but also reporting and what journalists should be looking out for? And I want to start with our economists on that. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Anthony.
Well, I'm not an economist, but I'll play one on this panel. Look, obviously, yeah, I mean, inflation, we have 41-year high inflation. It's very, very real. It's higher gas prices, it's higher grocery prices, it's higher rent. There's no question that's going to have an impact on the holiday selling season. Having said that, it's really, really hard to cancel Christmas, right? Like your 5-year-old, your 10-year-old doesn't want to hear Santa's not coming this year because the CPI was higher than expected last month. Now, I do think that you are going to be going to see consumers trying to kind of stretch their dollar. So maybe you might see some trading down from, department stores to more sort of like discount stores, whether that's like a Five Below, a Dollar General, maybe like a closeout retailer like an Ollie's, but there will be presents under the tree. Maybe the presents won't cost quite as much. But at the end of the day, I mean, the unemployment rate is at a 50-year low. It's really, once again, it's gonna be really tough to explain to your kids, when you got a job, why Christmas is canceled.
Right. That's good. That's a good point. Cristian, who is actually, you're the economist.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Cristian.
I certainly agree with everything that Anthony said. It's inflation is certainly elevated. The only thing I might add is that it will definitely have an impact, and it's going to have a differential impact certainly on different households, right? So a higher income affluent household actually is in a pretty good position. They have more savings today than they did prior to the pandemic. Everyone feels inflation, but certainly they don't feel it quite as much as folks at the other end, the bottom 20% of households that are running out of their savings, really exposed to all the inflationary pressures in terms of rents, food prices, gas prices, right? So they will still spend, they will still shop. They're going to certainly turn more to credit, buy now, pay later, other credit instruments to finance that shopping. But yeah, they're certainly, Christmas is not canceled. It will just look a little different.
Do you have anything to add, Edward?
Look, I just think there's a real opportunity to drive the human interest component of this, because I do think, to Christian's point, that this will be the Christmas of have and have nots. And I think if you look at where the high end is spending, experiential, luxury travel, expensive goods, it's that lower income consumer that's going to have to make a lot of choices. They're going to make choices in terms of how many gifts they give, the types of gifts they give, whether they wait for promotions. And I think that that's the angle that's, kind of interesting to us this holiday, because unlike the previous recession, where I think the high end saw a concurrent downturn with the lower end, this is definitely being led by the low end.
Okay. And Jordan, how has inflation affected your reporting? Is there something that you're doing different? Are there other factors and points that you're looking at when you're reporting now?
Well, definitely, I feel like, so I mostly cover the stores, like the retailers, but now in this season is very much understanding what's happening with the economy and bringing that into the conversation. Like, you can't just have, this is what Macy's reported without knowing what the larger, backdrop that they're operating in. So I would say that even like within the stories I'm writing, I'm making sure that if we're getting a number about this is what holiday sales expected increase is supposed to be, pair that against what the inflation rate is, to really be able to see if there's maybe that increase is actually a slowdown, like things like that. So you have to just take in more factors. And I think also the other thing I'll say is that over the past 2 years, there's been a big theme that happens during the holiday season. So you obviously had COVID, just like how do you execute a holiday season during that situation? Last year is supply chain issues. And so inflation has definitely shaped up to be like the big thing, but all those other things haven't gone away. So it's just been an interesting reporting process.
Okay. And for Cristian, just in terms of interest rates, and just what we're seeing, because I don't think the Fed is slowing down in terms of raising them, is this going to affect how the holidays are handled this year, maybe even, after the holiday season, just the impact that that's really going to have this time that we're going to see?
Yeah, definitely. It's more expensive to borrow, and that has to factor into consumers' decisions in terms of how much they're willing to take on in terms of debt. And you're right, the rates are not going down anytime soon. So consumers also have to expect that the rates are going to continue to rise even after this Christmas season. So if they're charging something on a credit card, or if they're planning to get a personal loan, they can expect to face even higher rates in the future. So that has to factor into their analysis. Again, that's going to hit the lower middle income households much more than folks at the higher end. So depending on which angle you're taking, which group you're focusing on, the effect could be very large or it could be more moderate.
Okay, good. Just in terms of just moving to another topic, just thinking about data and the data that's used to back up the reporting. What are good sources of economic data and that can be used by journalists to really drill down and get those numbers that are going to support their reporting? Cristian.
So I'll start. So I would say that it depends a bit on what focus we're looking at, right? If it's just trying to get a sense of the actual sales volume, right? The official statistics, the government data is lagged, right? So we really don't know with certainty what happened over the holidays until well after. But so for that reason, I like to focus more on the credit card data. There are a number of sources for that, from places like MasterCard or JP Morgan, Citibank. Visa, I think, has a report that comes out regularly as well. So that can give us a good sense in terms of overall trends. Now, not all spending is done on cards, of course, but it gives us a good sense of the direction, if not the final details in terms of the growth rates early on. And that's some of those sources update on a weekly basis. So they give us almost real-time data in terms of what's going on. Above that, beyond that, I would be looking for any type of other information about the financial state of the consumer, right? So data on income, employment, obviously the financial balance sheets, right? That can also be useful to put the numbers in context in terms of whether or not these borrowers are stressed, if they have additional savings, and there are a number of government sources that we have for that, and certainly we carry that at Moody's Analytics as well.
Okay. And Jordan, I would ask, what types of data have you relied on historically, and what will you be using this year?
So I like foot traffic data. So like Placer AI is a good place for that, Systematic Solutions. And, granted, not all shopping is done in stores, but especially when you want to do a comparative of like, are people returning to stores? All of those companies have great historical data. I also rely a lot on like the consultants survey. So like Deloitte, EY, they'll put out consumer behavior intentions. So not necessarily what people are doing, but how they feel and what they think they'll do this holiday season and what they'll spend. Usually there's like a number about like, this is how much money someone's planning on spending this year. Like that could be helpful for just like grounding in a story that you might be doing. Then there's other, to Cristian's point, credit, like just trying to see what people are saying. So Bankrate has some good data related to just how much credit and how high. I think the most recent is just like, it's just a record high of how people are spending on credit. And let me look. And then also I think just the census, even though it lags, they have a point about like retail inventories. So depending on what angle you're taking with the story, obviously inventory is a big thing floating around right now when it comes to retail. So those are the ones that I look at and will be looking at.
So for maybe our early journalists, what would you avoid? What type of data or sources would you avoid right now?
So right now, well, I am a retail reporter. So right now I'm getting pitched everything holiday season right now. And so just a lot of names swirling. So if I'm unfamiliar with a data provider, I usually Google to see if other reputable news outlets have used them, check like the methodology. I think that's really key, making sure that they're not just surveying 50 people, make sure it's like an actual like good amount of people. And so no name specifically, but these are just like some gut checks I do when I'm trying to see if I should use this data provider.
Okay, I like that. And then when we're covering specific retailers, I'm gonna lob this one to Edward. What types of retailers stand to benefit the most this holiday season, just based on how packages might be paid for, gifts might be paid for, maybe buy now, pay later? Just the retail market now is so much different because of so much that's happened during the pandemic that's still being carried over in terms of payment. So how would you answer that?
Two retailers we look at right now that we think are going to be successful this holiday are Walmart and Target. And I think what two components that they have that's very important. I think one, they both have omni-channel strategies. If you go back to, seems like forever ago, but back to December of last year, right? Omicron was raging, right? Foot traffic dropped off. We probably saw an artificially high amount of e-com, particularly in the last 2 weeks of Christmas, which are actually critical for in-store retailers. So both of them, the whole physical retailing environment had real difficulty. But we do think that the longer term secular trend on e-com is here to stay. So we think it's the combination, those hybrid retailers that have great e-com, but also have great store presence. One other thing, that's probably very appealing to those two retailers at this juncture is that they've got a lot of really good giftable items. Holiday is about convenience for the gifter. And so, they're convenient, they're easy to buy, and it has that kind of wide breadth of price points that, can give you your entire kind of Christmas shopping list.
Okay, that's great. And what about retailers that might struggle, that might not do as well this season? Edward, you can speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, clearly one name we don't cover, maybe Anthony does, Bed Bath & Beyond, they're having difficulty with their vendors. And I think that could be problematic for them. A lot of the legacy mall retailers like JCPenney, which has already been through bankruptcy once, probably continues to struggle. And I think this is somewhat controversial. I think they'll do obviously well on an absolute basis, but I think there's some story to be told about Amazon. Right? Amazon obviously had softer 3Q results. Do they have too much inventory? Are they as well positioned this holiday? And so again, they'll do better than 99% of retail, but they may not do as well as they have historically. I think that's a story worth thinking about.
Okay. And so Anthony, what about supply chain and labor shortages? Is supply chain still going to be or have as big of an effect as it had before?
From a year-over-year perspective, the supply chain is definitely in a much better position. Now, that's a little bit touch and go because of some of the COVID outbreaks that we're hearing about in China, and they're very draconian, methods for dealing with those. But overall, the supply chain's in better perspective. So we shouldn't necessarily be in the situation where there's, people are just like rushing out to just buy anything they can because there's just not a lot of product on the shelves. I think the bigger issue, or the thing I would be definitely more concerned about, is labor shortages. I mean, the labor market is still incredibly tight right now. The overall unemployment rate is about 3.5%. We've seen the strongest wage growth that we've seen in quite some time. And, there's a lot of retailers, like just like my own personal experience, recently I was at a Starbucks and they were only doing drive-through because they just couldn't get enough people to man the in-store. So that is definitely something that I would be more concerned with. I think there's more of a story there, is in terms of labor shortages as opposed to supply chain. I think supply chain, particularly on a year-over-year basis, is going to be actually in pretty good shape. If anything, there are some retailers, that are struggling because they're sitting on too much inventory.
Okay. So are there any total sales projections? We know that for a lot of retailers, the holiday season is where they make so much of their money, and that carries them through the slow period, that January, February, March time. So do we have any sales projections? Are we hearing that they would however much billions of, to bring in sales this holiday season? Is there something that people should be looking for, Anthony?
Yeah, so at a very kind of high macro level, there are a number of sort of industry sources and industry consultants that I typically look to get a feel for, what the expectations are for the holiday selling season. One is the National Retail Federation, the NRF. They are expecting holiday sales to be up about 6 to 8%. Another one's a company called eMarketer. They're expecting sales to be up about 7%. Deloitte, I think that was mentioned earlier, they're expecting a 4 to 6% increase in holiday sales. And then the final one I would probably point to is MasterCard Spending Pulse. They're expecting holiday sales to be up about 7.1%. Now, some of this might not necessarily be 100% apples to apples, because some of them you might use different, periods in terms of when they measure it. But it does seem like the consensus is that holiday sales are going to be about 7%. And, to put that in perspective, that would definitely be a slowdown from last year, in which the general consensus was that holiday sales were up, sort of kind of a low double-digit percentage.
Okay, that's good to know. 7%. I mean, that would be great coming right after, the pandemic and dealing with inflation. So that would be a good number. And so, sort of switching gears here, back to Jordan, are there any new story angles? I think we all agree that we have to get away from how many people are standing in line at Walmart or Target on Black Friday. So are there any new story angles that you're looking at this year?
Yes. So, I mean, this year is a great one in terms of it does feel like the first somewhat normal holiday season compared to the socially distanced ones that we've had the past 2 years. So I think it's a great opportunity to go back to those very classic tree lightings or the Santa and find sources and people and chat them up basically about how they're feeling. I'm from Chicago, so there is this crystal Kindle market downtown every year that was super strange over the past few years, but it's a generator of sales for the city. So if you're a local reporter, trying to find those touch points that are coming back in the real way. I think also this, I kind of mentioned this, but the slowdown in online sales growth. Like that's kind of that larger Amazon story. Like obviously they did gangbusters, but what does normal look like when that's not your only option of, you know, shopping online? So kind of thinking about like those, this is like, I think of it as what weren't we able to do and what ways did we alter our shopping behaviors? And does that come back this year? And this a good jumping off place to think about some reporting lines.
Okay. Is there anything that you just would not report on that you feel is overemphasized, is just not what we're looking for, should be looking at this year at all, just something just to leave alone?
I just don't feel like retailers are really doing the doorbusters in a real way. Like the store might open at 7 a.m. and that seems like really late compared to like what we expect at 5. And so also, I don't know if that's a great ROI for you to say like, this is what the holiday season means, unless you're doing a story on that very persistent doorbuster person and despite the odds, you know, like if you're trying to, I personally just think if you're trying to really assess like how people are feeling about the holiday season, how they're spending what money they do have, there's better ways of like reaching out to people, and it's not 5 a.m. at Walmart, I don't think, on Black Friday.
Okay, good. Okay, switching gears again. I want to have a conversation a little bit about tech and how that's going to impact the holiday season this year, and how consumers will be using tech in different ways, whether it's, you know, pick up in store, buy online, that sort of thing, return in store. And Anthony, I want to lead that conversation off with you. I think you know a lot about that. The last time we discussed it, you were very well versed. So I'm going to lob that over to you.
Sure. You know, look, I think there's a couple different things to think about on that angle. First off, you know, we've talked about this a few different times, right? This is going to be the first sort of post-pandemic holiday selling season. So I think we will see a shift away from online back to in-store. Part of that is, you know, people just won't have the health concerns. Part of it, I think, is for the experience, right, of going to the store. You know, there's a communal aspect of it, you know, seeing Santa, you know, all that type of stuff. You know, but having said that, yeah, it's going to be all about omni-channel. It sort of always is, right? Like you want to be able, retailers almost have to be able to give that shopper the ability to either, you know, buy online, have it shipped to their home, buy online, pick it up in store, like you mentioned, buy online, have it shipped from the store. So, you know, so you can get it pretty quickly. You know, I mean, that's just table stakes at this point. The other thing is, you know, I mean, price transparency is at all-time high levels because everyone's got a smartphone and you can check prices really easy. But I'm not sure that's necessarily a new angle. That's, you know, that's something that's been going on for quite some time. So to me, to some extent, the biggest like tech angle is the fact that I do think you are going to have this shift on a year-over-year basis from the store, from online back into the stores.
Okay. And then that takes me to Cristian. So was all of this with the pandemic just a blip or just really pandemic focused? Are we going to go back to older traditions?
Yeah, I think we're already seeing evidence of spending patterns shifting back, at least approaching where we were prior to the pandemic. People are traveling again. They're certainly buying more services versus goods or things, so more experiences versus actual things to gift. So I think that's a trend we will see up here this holiday season as well. People will be traveling home for the holidays, maybe preferring to treat everyone to a restaurant meal versus giving a gift, an actual thing. So I think we will see some of that shifting back to where we were prior to the pandemic, especially I think there's some pent up demand for those types of experiences versus actual things.
Okay, I like that. I think that I want to make it a little interactive. So I'm going to go in and check and see what questions we have. And here we go. Okay. So this one is for Jordan. It says, hi, Jordan. In the past 8 years of retail, I've seen a lot of changes, especially when the pandemic first hit with online sales. How do you think that will impact the inflation going up, and what could we see as a whole as far as prices going up? Oh, this is a student journalist, and they just want to talk to you, Jordan, about inflation and prices going up and how that could help impact the retail season and reporting.
Got it. Well, this reminds me that another great data provider, I'm not sure if I mentioned it, was Adobe Analytics, which provides online sales data. And I think their estimate was actually like online sales growth is going to be pretty anemic at like 2.5%. So that's another, just going back to like the tech angle of it all. Also, if the economist wants to weigh in on this, please do. But I think one thing that I think of is that a lot of retailers I talk to say that they know they shouldn't raise prices just across the board. Like there are key categories that people are going to be looking at and are more price sensitive to. So like you wouldn't necessarily raise your prices on toys all the way up when that is a key category. So just in a question like this, is kind of like looking at those key categories, knowing that retailers are being surgical about it. And then also some of those data providers like Adobe Analytics shows the categories that are seeing either inflation or deflation in some of the prices, which is then a larger story of like what prices were raised throughout the pandemic. And that's another storyline. And so it's like, maybe they don't have to raise the prices anymore. So anywho, but Cristian, I feel like you might have other thoughts as well.
I agree with what you said. I think you hit the nail on the head there. I think one thing too, so the elasticity or the sensitivity of buyers to prices does vary across products, right? So, and retailers have this, they study this very carefully in terms of understanding which prices they can raise more than others without losing sales volume. So if we think about luxury goods, so getting back to that, the distributional effects here, right? There might be a little bit more pricing power in some of those key luxury items than in other areas. The other, I think an interesting angle here is also something we call the bullwhip effect when it comes to the inventories we talked about. So last year there was a lot of accelerated or over ordering out of fear that retailers wouldn't be able to get products right in the middle of the pandemic because of all the supply chain issues. And now many of them are stuck with excess inventory. So you certainly have incentive to cut prices more in some goods and services, or some goods rather than others. So there will be some price differentiation along that line as well.
Okay. All right. And next, another question we have, which is, I think is a really good one. And I'm going to send this to Anthony. It says, how would companies view 7% growth for the holiday season this year? What would be considered, so it's a three-parter, what would be considered a successful holiday, and what would be considered a disaster?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, look, obviously, every company's in a different situation, but, look, given the fact that we have seen this record high inflation and there's so much concern about inflation, look, if retailers, I think that can do sort of mid to high, well, I mean, depending on your scale, but like, let's say relatively mature retailers that can do a mid to high single digit increase in top line, they're going to be dancing in the streets. Now, one thing to remember, or one thing to consider is that, sales for a company, it's a function of units and a function of price. So inflation is going to help them, right? Inflation right now is running, let's just call it like 8-9%. So, for even to get to 7%, that would basically mean that, your units were down like 2%. But at the end of the day, money's money, and retailers would be really happy with that. Now, once again, going to be very dependent on the specific retailer. I would think, sales declines, significant sales declines, particularly, if that also means lower profit margins because you have to discount more to move product, that would be bad, particularly given the fact that for retailers, they have a ton of fixed costs. So generally, if your sales are going down, your operating margin is going to fall off of a cliff because, regardless of your sales level, you're still going to have to pay your rent. You're still going to have to pay, salaries for people that are in your stores, utilities, all that sort of thing. So that's one way to think of it. But it really, like I said, it really is, company on a very company by company basis, because, you know, if you have a fast growing company and then they slow down to, you know, mid-single digit sales growth, you know, that maybe for them, that's a disaster.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, our next question is, we are used to omni-channel shopping experiences. Are you expecting brick and mortar retailers to ramp up in-store experiences in an attempt to lure shoppers back in store? And I'm gonna send that to Edward, because I think he was talking about omni-channel experiences. So what are your thoughts on that, Edward?
I think, you know, creating great store experiences is different in the pre-Christmas season versus the post-Christmas season. And I guess what I mean by that is, or during Christmas season, you know, when it's Christmas, you don't need the loud music, right? You don't need all the experiential things. You want to get in and get out, right? And because you have a list, you want to search for that list. You want it to be very convenient. And so the in-store experiences that matter, I think, most during the Christmas season are really things like, you know, how quick is in-store pickup? How much visibility do I have to inventory that's at the store, particularly if you're a last minute shopper? But from a broader context, yeah, I mean, people are looking for they're looking for great dining options. They're looking for a store that has a significant amount of inventory, right? Too often you go to these stores and because they've shifted all the inventory online, right? They've got the extra small and the extra large and nothing between. So, you know, customers are looking for retailers that can provide that great retail experience, that can provide a great shopping experience, and that I think also, you know, can sometimes in many instances provide differentiated merchandise, something you can only find in store, and there's that sense of discovery that you have. But again, I think that's separate from the holiday season where it's get me in, get me out. The one exception actually might be Santa, right? I think this is going to be, people are going to want to see Santa again, and that's going to be a traffic draw to many department stores and malls. And so you're going to see a lot of retailers try to lean into that, because I think a lot of kids haven't been able to give Santa a hug or their Christmas list in person over the past couple holidays.
Okay.
And to just follow up to that, a lot of another thing about like what's the big holiday sales number, sometimes in those numbers, like food and dining is baked into that. And so I think that point about thinking about people being able and more comfortable eating out again this holiday is another storyline. And when it comes to the Santa and the experiences, depending on where you are in the country, you're probably near a Macy's that just like launched the partnership with Toys R Us. So that's like an example of how, you know, retailers capitalizing on like the coming back together again and trying to have people stay in the store a little bit longer, just because they have that nostalgic angle to it.
Oh, that's a good point. So another question we had is, what impact is credit playing in retail this year? And is credit harder to get? Will it impact retail? And should buy now, pay later be covered more? So I think anyone who wants to answer on this, because you all have this background, can, but I definitely want Jordan to talk about, should buy now, pay later be covered more? I think I heard about it maybe one time. I've seen like 1 or 2 articles on it or on TV, but not coverage.
Yeah, I mean, I personally feel like I should cover it more. I have not, but every year you see, going back to those surveys, it's like more people are indicating that they will pay for their gifts through buy now, pay later. Most of the retailers I cover offer that option. So when you're checking out online with them, it's like either Affirm or Afterpay is an option. I think it's particularly an interesting time to cover it, because if people are more cost conscious and they're like, oh, I don't want to pay $200 right now, I'll pay 4 installments of $50. And yeah, so it's definitely a trend that's picking up more. It also gives you an opportunity to be more focused on a demographic of shoppers. So people using buy now, pay later are generally younger, not fully in their earning potential, and that could offer up interesting storylines. And it brings you into like January when people actually have to finish paying, and then you have another post-holiday story that you can work on.
You know, I would also add to that, you know, if you look at what's happened with both Affirm particularly a firm, recently, and certainly Afterpay, it's that, obviously the fintech market has been very problematic from a funding perspective. And so they were very open to kind of extending lots of credit to lots of different people, right? And historically, they really didn't run a check. So the limiting factor is if you had a sloppy pay or a late pay or no pay, then you kind of get kicked out of the system. But I think there's a little more scrutiny right now, given the fact that their cost of funding is going materially higher. But then to that first point, I mean, there's going to be a whole cohort of consumers that maybe missed a payment. You miss a payment on one of those services, like you can't use it again. And so there's probably a story to be told about someone that missed a payment and now is losing access to this potentially valuable area of credit.
I didn't know that. So I didn't know that because you hear so many people have multiples, like they stack them. I didn't know that if you missed the payment, you got kicked out of the whole system. That's a good point. That's good to know.
That's kind of how they kind of almost credit score in arrears, right? So they want to ensure that you continue to pay, and they think that the fact that you'll get booted, right, gives you a higher proclivity to pay that payment over anything else. But ultimately, they're seeing rising default rates as well. So there's a consumer that won't have access to that, and those numbers will probably increase, particularly as the macro environment weakens.
Yeah, there's an interesting angle given the limited protections on those buy now, pay laters. They also often require an auto pay or some type of commitment up front, right? So that's how they try to get to the top of the payment hierarchy, right? And keep the delinquency rate low, so it can really be an early indicator. The other thing I'd add is we have data from Equifax on a monthly basis that we receive, and we can see trends in terms of credit growth that are pretty alarming, right? Double-digit growth rate across credit scores. And in particular, we're seeing some of the fastest growth at the lower end, right? So that is an indication, again, that folks are having to dig into credit to supplement income and saving declines. We do expect to see that throughout the holiday season as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I almost wonder if there's kind of, building on those comments, like I almost wonder if there's an angle where there's just like this huge credit bomb that's going to implode in like January, right? So in other words, like, look, you go into a store, you buy $200 worth of gifts, you do buy now, pay later, you have to put the first $50 down, right then and there, and then you're going to make the three other $50 payments, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, but is that stretched consumer going to buy more than they probably should because they're like, okay, yeah, I'm good for it. And then suddenly you can't make that second payment, you can't make that third payment, you can't make that fourth payment. So that might be something interesting to kind of, take a look at, because with inflation, I would suspect that there's going to be a lot of people who are going to say, you know what, I'm going to take advantage of this buy now, pay later option.
Okay, that makes sense. Our next question, and I'm going to start off with Jordan here, and ask, how does a retail reporter hone in on sustainability issues this season?
Another great question. Another thing I wrestle with personally. So thank you guys for these. Sustainability, in the same category of buy now, pay later, everybody will tell you we're thinking more about it, and it's not a new thing. It's just something ramped up. So all the data shows that Gen Z or just younger consumers are more concerned about it. And then so that's one cohort that you can look at, like, what are they doing? But I think it's really interesting this holiday season, if you're consumer trying to save money, maybe you're thinking about regifting, or maybe you're thinking about fewer gifts, and that could feed into you care about the climate, all of that kind of stuff. But it does fall under that umbrella of sustainability, just like less gifts, which obviously plays into holiday sales. So I think those are a few angles to think of. I think this question also makes me remind myself to say, like, yes, there's the Walmarts and Targets of the world, but sometimes people think about sustainability by going and shopping at your local store and saving on shipping fees and all of those type of things. So especially if you're a local reporter really trying to think about your market, you can think about packaging a sustainability story through what the local businesses are doing. So there's a few like threads to pull on. And when it comes to data to like help ground the story, once again, EY or Deloitte, they have good studies. You can also think about like retailers who are like ThredUp or resell, recommerce. ThredUp has a report that comes out every year. So it's a few months old, but sometimes I just reach out to companies to say, hey, I'm thinking about this type of story. Do you guys have any fresh data or very holiday specific data to share around sustainability or like X?
Nice. Okay, good. Thank you for that. Does anyone else want to comment? Okay, I'll take that as a no. The next question we had was, and I'm going to start off with Anthony with this. It asks, is there a looming freight rail stoppage? And if so, how would that impact the holiday season?
Yeah, so here at Loop Capital, we have an excellent transportation analyst by the name of Rick Patterson. This is something that he has been all over. He doesn't really foresee a long freight stoppage. He basically thinks that if they can't reach an agreement by the time the contract expires and they decide to go on strike, literally the White House will come in and break the strike up. I mean, it's just too. It's critical infrastructure, and so you just can't have a situation in which you have a stoppage. And the recent precedent is with the LA ports, right, where there was there were concerns that there was going to be some type of work stoppage, and that just didn't happen. So that's not necessarily something that, at least here at Loop Capital, we're terribly concerned, is going to cast a damper on the upcoming holiday selling season.
Okay, Edward.
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably echo that sentiment. And the other thing to add is at this point, most of the inventory is already positioned correctly into the holiday season. So it's in local DCs, it's in the large DCs, it's in store or arriving at store now. So I just don't think it's as consequential. I think we were much more concerned about longshoreman strike maybe 2 months ago, where certainly goods were still being brought into the country. But I think at this point, again, if it were to happen, and we agree with what Anthony and his colleague have indicated, but if it were to happen, it just wouldn't be quite as disruptive for the holiday selling season, given kind of where we sit today.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And then this is an interesting question. Someone's asking, what about how do they position that January timeframe, which is still when some shopping is going on, even if it's just, looking for after the holiday season sales and such. I'm going to start with Jordan on this. How should they position that in their reporting?
So most retailers, their fourth quarter ends in late January, early February, definitely factoring in the fact that people are still shopping or returning things. So yes, that is an important time period. So I guess one angle is looking at returns, the rate of returns. If that's a thing, like historically online sales have a higher rate of returns. I believe NRF has data around that that would come out like that first week of January. That's a great question. I mean, I do feel like sometimes we hang up the hat and it's like holidays handled, but usually that first week of January, you actually start seeing the results come in, even if they're preliminary, just to see how strong it is. So that's something to be aware of, that just because, Christmas happened, the story still continues.
Okay. And then this is the last question. Someone asked, when do you start seeing the holiday returns? When do you start finding out when the actual total is? When are you going to be able to say, oh, we see the 7% or the 8% or whatever? When does that happen? Like, when does the tally stop, I guess?
I mean, it certainly happens on a rolling basis. I think you will get a good indication of obviously that key Black Friday, Cyber Monday period, pretty quickly. But then it's kind of the ensuing period, right? So we know the holiday selling season will be really busy up front. We know it'll be really busy as everyone procrastinates. It'll be very busy at the end, but it's really those kind of 2 weeks in between where you should be tracking weather. You should be looking at traffic levels that can kind of make or break that holiday. So I think you have to look at the holiday in its entirety, but your best indicator won't be that first couple days. It'll be that period in the middle that I think will be the real tell.
Okay. Anthony?
No, I was just going to add, I mean, there are a number of retailers that will report some type of holiday sales results in early January. And to some extent, you know, I was actually thinking about, you know, the answer to the last question. Look, if you have if there are retailers that are heavy on inventory going into the holidays, and then they don't have the holiday sales that, you know, that they were sort of looking for, well, they're going to have to mark the hell out of that inventory in January. I mean, January is always a big clearance month, but I could foresee a scenario, particularly with some of the retailers that have too much inventory right now, where they're going to have to get really, really aggressive, because the last thing they want to be doing is sitting on you know, stale inventory. Like stale inventory, it's not like wine; it doesn't get better with age.
That's true. And then we had another one come in where this is for Jordan. They're asking specifically, when do you get started really hunkering down with your retail reporting? Are there any topics or anything that you're working on right now? Do you start? I guess someone's just asking, how do they get started? And do you have topics already in your mind? Are you researching right now? That sort of thing, what your process is.
Yes, I actually published my first holiday story, I believe it was like October 10th. So yes, fully thinking about it. And that was just a story because like more deals were being pushed earlier in the year and whatnot. So to plant a flag. So yeah, I kind of, since this is my 4th year covering a holiday, kind of knowing that October is around the time that pitches start rolling in or surveys start rolling in. And so just even if I'm not writing something, I read all of that just to be aware if there's some interesting factoid. So I would suggest doing that. The other part of that question is like the themes I'm looking at, very similar to everything we were talking about on this panel. Now I really want to write a story on credit, since I feel like that was the scariest part of this panel. And I would also say that this makes me think of this time last year when supply chain was like top of mind for everyone. It was really helpful to already be consistently talking to like small business owners, people who don't have as much flex power as a big retailer when it comes to trying to get their stuff. So I would stay in constant communication with, you know, the retailers in your community, because they are dealing with all of the stuff that we have been talking about, and they probably know their shopper, their like face-to-face shopper a little bit better, so they can give you indications of what's happening, what's selling, what's not selling, what's the frustrations, all of that kind of stuff. So that's what I am currently doing through this process. And then of course, I guess every retail reporter works up to Black Friday. You do that, but there's so many more interesting stories as well.
I know, I'm Black Friday'd out already. But and one more question for this season, you know, being that it's inflation and you know, post-pandemic, all of that, who is the ideal shopper? What would a retailer who wants to make money, who is the ideal shopper? Anthony?
It's a rich shopper. I mean, there's no better way to put it. I mean, you know, it's someone who is just not that worried about, you know, inflation. It just hasn't impacted them as much. It's not that they don't notice that there's inflation, but it's just not going to really kind of impact their spending habits.
Okay.
I would also say a shopper who shops across channels. Retailers love that. They're usually much more loyal. So if you're like buying something online, if you're also going in the store, if you're doing all of that on the app, all of that. So if you know somebody like that, that is a like chef's kiss for a retailer.
Edward?
Maybe I'd add one more to that. I'd probably say the family shopper, because I think while it might be fine for me to tell my wife we're going to go on a fancy vacation, the two of us, it's not the same to tell my 7 and 10-year-old, hey, you know, we're not, you know, you're not getting toys this Christmas. We're going to go somewhere, even if it's a great vacation. So I think given the higher amount of experiential and dining gifting that we're seeing, I think that family shopper still has to give the toy, the books, the clothes. And so I think that's still, you know, very much, you know, aligned with what the retailers are obviously trying to sell.
Okay. Cristian, do you have anything to add?
I think everyone covered it. I think what I would add is that there are niches, right, of opportunity still. So we think about like I don't know if everyone's heard about the lipstick effect. So in a time of stress, in a time of worries about inflation or recession, right? People cut back, but they may still splurge on some smaller luxury, like a lipstick or like a fancy coffee, right? Or a cocktail. So will we see that type of behavior, even in those parts of the population that I mentioned earlier may be stressed? They may still splurge on very specific items. So a retailer that can fit that niche may still be successful.
Okay. Well, great. I mean, I think that this was such a great webinar, and I think that it crossed boundaries from beginning journalists all the way up to experienced journalists. I learned so much with all of you tonight, and I can't thank you enough for being on the panel and giving us your expertise. And Anthony, Cristian, Jordan, and Edward, you all did a fabulous job, and thank you once again.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.